As someone with a solid training foundation, I am very eager to share these 10 secrets of muscle hypertrophy with everyone. If the knowledge in this episode helps you build muscle, please like, share, and subscribe. If you watching this want to become truly strong, you should focus on strength training, much like an ant, which can carry food 10 times its own body weight for survival. If you want to become muscular and well-defined, you should focus on hypertrophy, which is what I am going to talk to you about. Before I begin, there are a few things I want to say. This year, my goal is the same as yours. I will focus purely on muscle hypertrophy. For the past several years, I have been training with light weights, which resulted in no significant increase in muscle dimension. From this year on, my goal will be primarily muscle hypertrophy. Assuming there are two categories, strength and hypertrophy, I will put 80% of my focus on strength and only 20% on hypertrophy because I truly care about my strength. Hypertrophy, if it happens, that's great. So in the year 2026, I will put 80% of my focus on hypertrophy. I really want to increase my bulk and the remaining 20% on strength training to see if I can improve my bench press results. Let's begin with the 10 basic rules of muscle hypertrophy. First, volume. Training volume is the key among keys. If you want to build muscle as your training time and level increase, you need to do more repetitions or sets. If you want to build muscle, you have to work harder than before. You must constantly increase training volume. You have to give your body a reason to change. More training stimulates your body and pushes it to change. As Dr. Mike said, volume is key. Comparing last year when my main goal was strength, I only did 14 sets per training session. This year, I will do 20 sets or more, and I will train 6 times a week compared to at least 4 times last year. This is a very large volume, and you must work hard to break through your overall training volume. Think about this. If your goal is hypertrophy, and you track your training volume, how much weight you lifted in each set, you should be increasing the total weight lifted for the same exercise compared to last year. So this year, I will have more volume than before. To match it, I will pay close attention to recovery, ensuring sleep and diet are on point, and ensuring a slight caloric surplus. If you want to build muscle, volume is your friend. You must track it weekly and monthly. Have I made progress? How many sets did I do for each muscle group on average? How many for the chest? How many for the back? I will compare these over the next few months. Again, if your goal is hypertrophy, volume is your friend. Second, periodize your training volume. You need to periodize your training volume just like the relationship between strength training and intensity, cycling your volume throughout the year. Looking at the first rule, should I keep increasing volume until I am exhausted? Think about it. If I start at 20 sets, increase to 22 next week, then 24 the next at that pace, will I be doing 36 sets per session after 3 months? I would be completely dead and unable to recover. You need to periodize your training volume, just as you periodize intensity during strength training, which everyone knows, as in a linear periodization plan. This means you do not do the same amount of volume in every training session. Here, I have placed a rough training volume cycle table, see image. This is just an example. Assume you do 12 sets per muscle group for weeks 1 to 4, 14 sets for weeks 5 to 8, and then slowly increase. Later, it increases to 18 sets. In weeks 17 to 20, you reduce the volume and restart the cycle from 13 sets, following the previous rhythm and slowly increasing. Note that it starts from 13, which is 1 set more than the previous 12. The rhythm is very slow, which involves a lot of other knowledge that I won't expand on for now. For example, this week in my pull training day, I did a total of about 20 formal sets. I think some people might say 20 sets doesn't look like much, but why? I want to say I am just starting from this point, about 20 sets per week. In the next training block, I will increase it and then increase it again. After reaching a certain point, I will reduce it to the range of 20 to 22, usually a bit more than the starting point of the previous cycle, and start again. This is a cyclical periodization because at any given time, the body can only handle so much volume before it fails to recover. If you continuously add too much burden to your body, you will eventually overtrain. Perhaps you will start to feel joint pain, and your body cannot recover from such high training volume. However, you know that volume is the key to hypertrophy. Usually this periodization of increasing training volume is like the linear plan of strength training. If you draw a chart, it looks like a wave intensity gradually increases, reaches a point, then deloads to a position slightly higher than the starting point of your previous cycle, and then gradually increases to a point higher than the peak of the previous cycle before deloading again. This repeats Again, if your goal is hypertrophy, you need to periodize your training volume. Third, large compound exercises, such as the bench press, deadlift, squats, etc. Never train to absolute failure in every set, meaning until you literally cannot move the weight anymore. You need to do as many reps as possible, for example, until you reach a point where you cannot perform another rep. If you are doing a high volume training plan like my plan this year, do not do the so-called as many reps as possible given a weight until you cannot move it for large compound movements like the big 3 lifts, where your form breaks down while you are still trying. Just reach the point where technical form starts to break down. These large compound movements are usually your main exercises for the day. For such movements, bench press, deadlift, squat, etc., reaching the point where technique starts to break down, for example, when the speed of the lift significantly slows down or your form starts to break, is enough. Suppose you can complete 9 repetitions with good form, and the 10th must be deformed to push it up, and your limit is also there. Doing 9 reps is better than doing that 10th rep. We call the 10th rep absolute failure and the 9th technical failure. Why? You definitely do not want to accumulate too much fatigue or nervous system stress in one training session, especially if you plan to do high volume training. If you go to absolute failure on every set of these large compound movements, you will accumulate a lot of fatigue in your body week after week and month after month. This will damage your strength performance, hinder you from completing your goals in strength, and very likely make it impossible for you to recover. I think training to absolute failure still has some use. This has always been a controversial topic. I think it depends on how much training volume you do. If you do very little volume, I think training to absolute failure is acceptable with a degree of form breakdown, not excessive or unsafe. Many studies also support this, which you can look up online. But why do many studies use training to failure as an experimental method? It is because this is a very simple way to determine if the test subject is improving. You cannot use RPE, rate of perceived exertion, as a research parameter because it is very subjective. Most of the studies you see use the method of training to absolute failure. Researchers do not use it because of its effectiveness, but because it is simple and rigorous. It controls intensity as a variable. Frankly, RPE is too subjective. Use simple and rigorous. For example, if I tell you to do a set at RPE 80% effort, you might end up doing 8, 9, or 10 reps. You know what I mean. Do you dare use such data for research? But if I tell you to do this set to absolute failure until you truly cannot do another, you will clearly know you used every bit of effort. For research, this is a good and rigorous method. But for hypertrophy, it is completely unnecessary. If you adopt a high frequency, high volume training method, you should try to minimize going to absolute failure on these large compound movements. You can just go to technical failure. Fourth, isolation exercises. You can train to absolute failure. Even if you train isolation exercises to failure, the fatigue and pressure on your body are very small compared to the pressure and fatigue caused by large compound exercises like squats and deadlifts. For example, if you do bicep curls, it is okay to occasionally use your maximum effort on a set to reach absolute failure where you cannot lift one more. For another example, if you do tricep overhead extensions, again, it is okay to go to failure on an occasional set. Why? What is the difference? For example, your first exercise is deadlift and the second is bicep curls. Think about how it feels when you deadlift 500 pounds to absolute failure. That is a very high volume. Volume per set equals weight times reps. Your body will be very fatigued because this movement requires too many muscles to participate. Then you go to curl 80 pounds to failure. As I said before, the method of training to failure used in certain studies is a good way to ensure participants really worked hard. For small muscle groups, such as the biceps, maybe you feel the burn and think it is okay. Suppose you use 65% of your 1 rep max and do 15 reps and you reach absolute failure. This is a good way to ensure you have trained hard. Fifth, train the same muscle group at least twice a week, for example. In my personal hypertrophy plan this year, I will squat 4 times, bench press 3 times, and deadlift twice a week. I will train other parts at least twice. Twice is usually the minimum. Assuming just twice, it will be 2 push sessions, 2 pull sessions, and 2 squat sessions. Sometimes there are small adjustments, which is personal preference. I squat 4 times a week, bench press 3 times, overhead press 3 times, etc. For my leg-focused training day, I will do squats, deadlifts, etc. And at the end, I will do 3 sets of incline bench press just to improve that movement. I think increasing strength is very important. Last year, so I can achieve more volume with the same number of sets compared to before. To do such high volume in a week, I will distribute it and add other training exercises. I think high frequency training is a good way to distribute this volume. If the frequency is too low and you still want to ensure volume, the volume per session would be too high to recover from. If you train 6 days a week, I think training each muscle group at least twice a week is a very good method. Even this high frequency method is a good way to improve a specific exercise you personally want to enhance. Sixth, be specialized in main training exercises. While auxiliary exercises can have more variety rather than focusing on one or two, focus on the main training exercises you want to improve or enhance. The main exercises here do not necessarily refer to the big three, but to specific compound movements you personally like. As I mentioned before, I will still have 20% of my focus on strength goals. For Omar, this is mostly the big three: standing overhead press or Olympic lifting movements. As for auxiliary exercises, you can change them often. For example, assume your plan is a 4-week training module. You adjust it every 4 weeks. For triceps, suppose you choose the close grip bench press as an auxiliary exercise for 4 weeks. Then you change to floor press, and after another 4 weeks, perhaps you change to dumbbell movements, etc. Because for the goal of hypertrophy, changing auxiliary exercises frequently is also key. This is the same as in strength training. You want to increase mechanical tension and improve the overall load lifted by specializing in main training exercises and becoming stronger in them. Then you add a few auxiliary exercises and change them frequently to prevent your body from adapting, which forces it to change. Seventh, training intensity should mostly be between 65% and 85%. Don't go to the limit every session. What intensity should you train at? If you are more inclined towards strength, that perhaps you use your limit weight 1 to 3 times a year, which is 100% of your limit, you might have daily limit goals in your training plan, perhaps at 90% or 92% of your 1 rep max, perhaps for squats or deadlifts. You might use 90% of your 1 rep max 3 times a week. If your goal is hypertrophy, this will actually limit your overall training intensity. Assuming you use 85% of your 1 rep max, which is about 5 repetitions, this is about the lowest number of reps for hypertrophy. The intensity is too high and the volume cannot go up. You should arrange the intensity of both main training exercises and isolation exercises to be around 65 to 85%. If you really want to challenge the limit weight, you need time and patience. This usually requires a long time of practice, and the higher your level, the longer this training cycle usually is. If your goal is hypertrophy, you should focus on volume and arrange the intensity between 65 and 85% so that you can have good training volume. For me personally, 70 to 85% is my usual range for main training exercises, and the intensity of auxiliary exercises will be between 60 and 70%. Eighth, select auxiliary training exercises that allow you to feel the target muscle actively contracting. For auxiliary training exercises, you should focus on the movement process and feel the active contraction of the target muscle. The same movement feels different for everyone because everyone's body structure is slightly different, and it depends on how the practitioner performs the movement. Perhaps everyone says a certain exercise is good and you do it, but you must ensure you can feel the contraction of the target muscle. I will give an example. I personally think the incline bench press is an absolute, very good training exercise. But for some, because the angle of the incline bench is too high, they just cannot feel the contraction of the upper chest. They always feel the anterior deltoids contracting significantly, and some even feel the triceps contracting significantly anyway. It is not the upper chest. At this time, if they adjust the angle of the bench to 20 to 30 degrees, they will immediately feel a strong contraction of the upper chest. So on their push training day, if they particularly want to improve their upper chest and want to do incline bench press, which of the 2 versions just mentioned should they choose? Of course, it is the 20 to 30 degree version of the incline bench press. It is the same for me, whether it is biceps, triceps, back, shoulders, etc. As long as they are auxiliary exercises, you should pick exercises where you can feel a clear contraction of the target muscle. Ninth, strengthen lagging body parts. First, the plan provided in this video is not a beginner's plan. As someone who has been training for a long time, this means I have had many strong parts for a long time. My chest, back, etc. My weak part is my arms. If I really want to become stronger and increase more muscle mass, I must focus on these weak parts. This makes perfect sense. Last year, many friends told me, "You have been training for many years. implying my physique is not great. I want to say that I have never trained just for looks. I have different goals. Strength training is like one beast, and hypertrophy is another completely different beast. I have many different goals. Last year I did a relatively low volume training plan. I had to ensure my body felt okay. 3 sets of biceps a week, that is only 150 sets of biceps a year. This year, my goal is hypertrophy. Even the most basic hypertrophy plan would be far higher than 3 sets a week. For biceps, it should at least be 6 to 12 sets a week. Of course, that is just my requirement for myself. 10th, high frequency is the key to adapting to high volume. I personally will train 6 days a week. I think high frequency is the key to handling this high volume. It facilitates distribution. If it were the same volume and you had to distribute it into 4 or 5 training sessions, the degree of fatigue caused to the body per session would be too high. In each training session, your body can only recover from the fatigue created by a certain amount of training volume. How can you execute this better? You should first calculate the volume for each part and then distribute it into the training sessions you have per week. Assuming the same volume compared to distributing it into 4 days, if you distribute it into 6 days, the latter will make it easier for you to recover. Note point 2 above, the volume itself must be periodized, gradually increased, and then reduced. The period when you reduce the periodizal speeds, volume is used to recover from the fatigue caused by the previous high volume, not to mention the peak phase of later volume, periodization. Simply put, here is an experiment. In the year 2016, people, 13 men and 3 women from the Norwegian national powerlifting team, aged 18 to 25, all with at least 1 year of training experience, were divided into 2 groups. One group trained 3 times a week, bench press, deadlift, squat, same as before. The other group trained 6 times a week. First, the movements, volume, intensity, etc. were the same for both groups. This means the 3 times a week group's training volume per session was twice that of the 6 times a week group. The training plan lasted 15 weeks. The result was that the 6 times a week group increased their big 3 lifts by 10% on average from their base, while the 3 times a week group, despite having the same training content, only increased them by 5% from their base. There is a lot of content in today's video. If you do not fully understand it after watching it once, I suggest you watch it a second time. I hope this knowledge can help you. If today's content was helpful, you are welcome to like and subscribe. See you next time.